Boom, hello, welcome to Rob Barkley Studios, where, as you can see, our production budget has increased massively. Today we're going to be talking about how to write a one-shot and why it's not as hard as you think. Stay tuned. Okay, so the first thing so genius is outline versus situation. This is kind of the two main methods that I see as to how people do it. Your sort of average, standard, classic way of doing it, I think, is the outline method. But the way I do it now is the situation method. It's good having something to suggest to you. So, how does that work? Well, firstly, we'll talk about outline. So outline is kind of prepping, like, the adventure start to finish, the situations, everything. Situation is just merely setting up a situation or a scenario, and then having your players act and you improving on how it should go from there, and maybe having some ideas as to the resolutions. But so I think, oh, there we go. So as you can see, outline, you can have generally an intro, and I prep an intro for every game, and that is because that's like the hardest part, is getting into it and getting started. So you have intro, beginning, middle, end, classic. Same, you can also call them part 1, 2 and 3, but basically they mean the same thing. The intro is, here's where your characters are and here's what their current situation is. Beginning is, here is the start of the plot, we're moving forward into it. Middle is the middle of the plot, right, knee deep in the situation, you know, halfway through the dungeon or whatever it may be. And the end is the resolution of the adventure. So that, standard, boring, everyone knows it. I say boring, it's, you know, it's the classic way of doing it, and it's a good way to make sure that what you're doing is kind of following a specific plot, and good way of tracking that. Situation. So you have intro, setups, and possible resolutions. So this is a bit different. So again, you have the intro because that's the hardest part and you want to get that right. That sets the tone for the adventure, and it makes everyone kind of know what's going on. So that can be something as simple as you're in a tavern and a guy walks in, although maybe that's set up. But you're in a tavern, or you're walking down the road, or just, I often write like a little paragraph script, maybe 100 words, just to kind of rattle off at the start. Maybe it's just bullet points, which is also how I've done it, where it's just like, you're in a tavern, you are doing this. Maybe have the players introduce themselves and describe their characters. The setup is kind of like the beginning, if you're looking at the outline method, where the first thing that happens is, you know, the adventure is started, and we'll go through examples of these in a moment. So the adventure is started and the players are put into the situation. Then, that's it. So these two are probably, it can be anywhere from, you know, 20 minutes to an hour, maybe even more, hour and a half, 2 hours. But that is your entire prep. Apart from resolution, that should have probably an S on the end, but it basically is, this isn't even really a formal part of the prep, it's just where it could end. And so we'll see that in the end. And it's best, if you're doing this method, to have a few resolution types, or things, basically possible endings, if you think about it like a video game. And that can really help you ensure that you get, you know, the right kind of adventure plot and story moving forward. So, here's example 1. This is going to be an example using the outline method. So, it's called Curse of the Dead. And these are not very imaginative names because I came up with them in about 30 seconds. So, Curse of the Dead. So, intro. This is just kind of bullet points to help me, but intro is, the party is travelling. So you would describe the road, you would describe their destination and the journey they've taken, and you would describe sort of how they got there, where they're going. So for this, maybe it's just simply, there's 2 towns and they're moving between one of them looking for work. Okay, that's your introduction. Maybe you say, okay, what would your characters be doing while they're traveling? or what conversations do they have. You know, try and kind of gain an understanding of the characters and let everyone else understand each other's characters. Part 1 is the beginning, kicking us into the plot of the Curse of the Dead. So they're travelling along when suddenly they're attacked by zombies. And they kill the zombies, and we see that there is some kind of moving forward plot device, a plot continuizer, which is not the right word for it, but I can't remember what it is. But basically, you know, some identification or some method of moving the plot forward. So, for instance, in this place, it could be one of the zombies has a note, or it could be the zombie has a mark, like the White Hand of Saruman, or, you know, something along those lines. Or even, it could be, you know, the ranger tries to see where the zombies came from. And you say, yeah, there's tracks from the zombies leading off into the forest, or into that cave, or wherever it might be. Or maybe you're traveling with a companion who is from one of the towns, who's an NPC, and he says, you know, there's been reports of zombie attacks all over this road. Coincidentally, you could also do, as the intro, you were traveling, escorting a young nobleman, or an old nobleman, or a nobleman, or someone who's paid for you to escort them because of zombie attacks on the road. Then that can sort of lead you in. Or maybe, say, the cleric or the paladin has come to this area to investigate zombie attacks. You know, like, you can set it up before the start of the game, especially for a one-shot, because in a one-shot you don't want to spend all this time trying to get the players invested, because you've only got like 4 hours, or if you're checks you've got 9 hours, so you could probably manage it. Part 2. So this is, you know, the middle, the main section of the plot. So we have basically, part 1 and 2 is all about, or intro and part 1, sorry, is all about getting the party involved in the plot. So part 2 I've called Dead Guy Lair, because chances are, you know, it's a lich or a necromancer who has a lair and a dungeon, and that's the main part of the adventure, is moving through it. Or maybe it's, you know, it could be something else, like there's an ancient burial ground that's been disturbed, and so there's all these zombies who are coming out to defend it because some foolish adventurers tried to loot it, you know. But the main part of the adventure, this is kind of, you know, when you're thinking up, what do I want to do for an adventure, this would be kind of what you're thinking of, is like, I'd love to do a dungeon about zombies, or I'd love to do a disturbed burial ground or something. That's kind of where a lot of your idea will come from, and then before and after is basically providing context for the main section of the gameplay, which is part 2 in the middle, and probably one of the most important. Part 3, your conclusion. That's finding the necromancer and killing him, or that's attacking, you know, zombies, or that's returning the cursed amulet. That is your Indiana Jones saving the day moment. You're throwing the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. It's the end. Now, some notes on that. Cliffhangers are good, but don't do a cliffhanger every one shot, because it's just going to annoy people. Bad taste in the mouth, which is a weird thing to say out of the blue, but never let your party just outright win. That is always something, you know, if it's a one shot, maybe the noble they were escorting was killed, but they managed to kill the necromancer. Or maybe, you know, one of the party became infected, and but doesn't know it yet, or something. Like, try and make it so that the party, you know, the group is like, oh, you know, that's kind of annoying, because that always, it just gives a game much more sense of life and death rather than a video game. You know, it distinguishes that. Plus, if it's something, you know, big enough, like the, you know, the cursed amulet has cursed one of the party or something like that, then maybe the players will want to come back for a part 2 or 3 and make it into a mini campaign or a full campaign. I mean, that's how many campaigns have got started, is running a one shot and having something bad happen right at the end, and it moves into more. So if you're looking to start campaign play, this is a really good way of doing it, because then you've already got established characters and goals and motives, and already got an established plot. So if you've got a really good group, especially, that's a really good point. So we've talked about outline method enough, and now let's talk example 2, which is the situation method. So this is called Wayward Son, which is I'm kind of basing off of a classic adventure that I'm pretty sure a few people have run something along these lines. Like this kind of outline, or not outline, this situation is kind of classic. So, introduction. Again, hardest part of the game to get right and most important. So, have your party on a job. So for this one, their presence is requested at a local monastery, or it could be anything, monastery, prison, something like that, where people live for this adventure anyway. So this one is a monastery. So they're requested, adventurers wanted. You've somehow, especially if it's a one-shot, like I say, you don't need to, have the old wizard sitting in the corner of the tavern and come up and say, I might have a job for you, come see me tomorrow. You can just say, you have accepted a job and you are on your way, or you have just arrived at the monastery. And again, set up the characters, that's no different. So, setup, exposition, and a journey. So, here's the expedition. I'm just going to give you the example and then sort of go into what that means in a vacuum. So, for this example, one of our acolytes from the monastery has run away, and they're not allowed to run away because he's signed, or he's pledged his life to the monastery, and he is a chosen one, and it's really important that we get him back. He is the Wayward Son. He escaped in the night with a woman who helped him escape, and she claimed to be his mother. We need you to go get him back, and we'll pay you handsomely. That's fine. Then you have a journey. Go to wherever the boy is, grab him and bring him back. That is the main part of your prep. Once you've given the exposition, you've allowed the players to answer questions, and remember, this can be half of a 5-page of bullet points, and that's it. That's your entire prep. And that sounds daunting, especially if you're new, to be like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. Just make it up, because honestly, it's so much easier than people realize just to come up with what makes sense in the story. Especially if you've had some practice. So if you're really nervous, maybe the outline method is better to start with. But I guarantee you that 5 times out of 10 at least, like half the time, you're going to find that it just turns into this method anyway, when the party completely go off path and do something else and you have to improv anyway. So, So, have the party go find the boy. And, say, we'll give you 10,000 gold, or, whatever. So they go. And, there's a journey through the woods. Maybe you have a couple encounters here, just flip through monster and go, ooh, let's make them fight an owlbear in the forest. Cool, whatever, it doesn't matter. Or maybe not. But they eventually find the boy and the mother in a clearing. So this kind of setup, all you need to do is push them into the adventure. You're not prepping how the adventure goes necessarily. Maybe you've got words in your head and information, but you're not prepping that. You're prepping the start, pushing them forwards and saying, right, this is where you're going. Resolutions. So, here is the big one for me. That's the easiest way to run a killer game, is Moral Dilemma. Basically, resolutions is you want to think up a couple endings. So, here's some possible endings for this. So, they grab the boy and take him home, but the mother puts up a fight and they have to fight the mum. Or, here's the other one, is it turns out that they were torturing the boy because they were trying to coax some divine power out of him, and the woman isn't necessarily his mother, or maybe she is, but she was just a caring person who couldn't stand by and watch them kind of brutalize this boy. And so now you have Moral Dilemma, and I put it in ridiculous words like that because honestly, if you're looking to run a one-shot and you're scared that people aren't gonna kind of, or you're scared about doing a bad adventure, or you're scared about not doing well, just do a Moral Dilemma. It is the easiest way to make life well, is the easiest way to run an adventure, and at the end have everyone go, my mind is blown. And it's so easy. All you do is you give them two choices like that, and then you just sit and watch the party. Say, no, maybe the fighter is like, we are being paid to get this boy taken back. That's our job. We're going to do it. But maybe the cleric or the paladin's like, no, we can't take him back to torturing people. And they have a discussion. That could last hours. And if it's going on too long, just make the mum a dragon or something and turn into it. Turn into a dragon and start killing them. Or, just something happen. But if you just set up a simple moral dilemma, I'll give you another example is, I found a one-shot, I did a one-shot where the party woke up at the end of a battle which their team lost. They had to escape they had to escape the battlefield while the kind of other team were coming around killing everyone, and then they went on their journey, and their journey led them back to camp, which is where the rest of the army that survived on their team are waiting. And so the party talked, and they said, look, they saw that there was an army, or the other army, the bad guys who beat them, are marching this way. And so half the party were super brave and said, no, we'll stand and fight and this will be our last stand. The other half were like, no, let's go. And then there was a group of squabbling lords, and they just talked for an hour, like arguing over whether they should run away or come back. And then by the time they, eventually after about an hour, I said, okay, the Southern Army is here, and they crushed them. But at the end of that, you say, right, that's where we'll end the session, guys. You've just, had this fight or whatever. And they go, whoa, man, that's crazy. We had awesome roleplay moments and that blew my mind. It's so easy if you just throw a moral dilemma in there. And I know I'm spending ages on this, but if you're worried about running a game and you don't think your story's good or anything, strip it away and just say, right, what can I put in front of the party to make them have a problem? Even if it's like, there's one person that they can save, or there's another person that they can save, and one person is a lord's daughter, or a better example would be, one person is the daughter of a lord who they are contracted to save, but the other two people are, or there's two people that they can save on the other side that are just commoners, but there's two of them, but they've been paid to find the lord's daughter, that sort of thing. Or you could even have them suspended in cages that are tied to the same rope. So if you cut the rope on one side, one person's going to die and one person will survive, and you have to choose, something like that. And half the time maybe the party just makes the choice. The other half the time they work something out. They're like, all right, I'm going to mage hand this cage, or something crazy, and let that happen. Just go with it, because in the end, if they do manage to save all three people, they're going to feel such a sense of accomplishment, and they're going to be on great, euphoric high, like, we did it, we saved them, we're going to get paid, and we look like awesome guys, that's great. And if they don't, they leave just being like, oh god, that was intense, my mind is blown. So that is how you do situation. You just do the start of the adventure and the intro, and then you leave them to see what happens, and maybe come up with a few ideas for the ending and the journey along the way. So, things to remember about one-shots. Firstly, pick good players, because if you have players that aren't going to want to roleplay, or not even that, but players that this adventure isn't suited to, don't run them. Try and avoid running, if you're running a super heavy moral dilemma filled adventure, but you have one player sign up who is just a murder hobo and doesn't give a shit about story or anything, just wants to kill everything, then he's not going to be right for that game. If you just run a battle royale, get him in, but pick players who'll be right for the story and make it work for you. Moral conflict, easy win. Talk this to death, I'm not going to say anything else. This good. It makes you look like a genius, and it's easy. Meeting people is boring. When you start a campaign, it's fine to have the characters not know each other. If you start a one shot and the characters don't know each other, you're going to waste half an hour to an hour of time with them introducing each other, introducing themselves to each other. So don't. Just have them already know each other and go into it. The story is key. You know, maybe they met each other yesterday and they've had a couple drinks. That's fine. They don't have to have known each other all their lives, but make it so that there's an actual connection already, because then you don't have to worry about something like that. Tie-ins. Really easy way to make your adventure awesome. Everyone posts their character concepts and you just say, okay, so your character is the son of a disgraced lord. That's fine. This lord used to own a castle out in the woods, and that is now where the necromancer lives, and that is why you were travelling there, to reclaim your ancestral home. Then that player is instantly like, that's awesome, because my character has a vested interest in it, and that is going to inform how he acts. And that takes you no effort and time, but instantly makes your game mean so much more if each player or each character has a tie-in to the plot you have. You know, your sister's gone missing and you're here to try and find her because you know she went missing around this area. Now he sees his sister as a zombie. Instantly, your character's depressed. You get an awesome roleplay moment as he kills his sister again, and you look like an evil genius, and the player maybe never speaks to you again, but has a great time. You know, you can do so many of these so easily and do it every time because it is worth it. It is easy. If you follow everything I've said, you don't have enough to do a one-shot because you need your own story. I mean, you can take some of the ideas I've given and run with them, but it is not hard. It is daunting when you're first doing it and you think, oh my god, this is going to be a nightmare. But if you have players, especially if they're people you've gamed with before, you know, if like you're in a regular campaign group and one of the players, you know, can't make it or something, and so you might say, right, you know, if we're going to do a one-shot this week, I'd like to run it. And if you're with a group of people you know, you'll absolutely be fine. If it's randoms, you'll also be fine, because the worst that can happen is the adventure goes silly, you don't know what you're doing, and you know, you can't find the monsters and they murder Hobo and everything, but then you sit down afterwards and you're like, okay, that didn't go well, but here's how I change it in the future. But again, that kind of ties back to good players. If you have good players, you could never go wrong, because you know, you could easily have an adventure but you are in a dungeon, or you are in a white square room, you 4 players go, and if you have good enough players, they could just roleplay it and try and figure out a way out, and you have nothing but, you know, in a vacuum, good players are everything. And if you don't have good players, either talk to the player, you know, if it's campaign, but if it's a one-shot, the worst that can happen is you lose 4 hours of your life and you learn something. So I hope this is kind of, not necessarily inspired, but kind of settled your stomach about running one-shots. And if you're planning to, you know, leave a comment or hit me up on Facebook or whatever, if you know who I am, and I can give you any tips, and I'd love to play in your game. So thank you for watching, and may your dice roll.